In present-day America, the queer community is often referred to as the LGBTQIA+ community. However, there was a time in which this loving collective of individuals did not exist to the public eye, and the journey to better representation and rights seemed impossible. Thanks to many powerful and influential individuals of the past, the current conditions of life for many members is much better. However, there is still plenty of room for improvement, especially for those members of color. The term queer is an umbrella term. As we live in a world transitioning from binary structures to a more fluid one, our labels should too. It is also better to use terms like queer, as it is better includes all the members of the community. Today, there are tons of different ways people can express themselves with their sexual identity and gender identity, which is one of the common misconceptions that many people have, is that they believe sexual orientation and gender to be the same thing when they are in fact very different. Sexual orientation, by definition, is who one is attracted to, whether it be romantically, emotionally, sexually, or a mix/combination of all or none. Someone's gender identity is who they are and has nothing to do with who they are attracted to. Today, the list of different sexual orientation goes on, including, but not limited to, lesbian, gay, asexual, and more. The best part about all of it is that no one can tell you who to be or how to identify. In addition, the switch from binary to gender fluid, as well as a more fluid spectrum of sexual orientations, allows for anyone to find a label that perfectly describes them if they so choose to have a label. Due to this idea of the gender spectrum, we get terms such as gender fluidity. Gender fluidity refers to the change over time in a person's gender expression or gender identity, or both. That change might be an expression but not identity, or an identity but not expression. Basically, what it means is that this person can identify themselves internally and present themselves to the world however they prefer, whether that be in a more masculine way one day, a more feminine way another day, or neither.
I feel mostly comfortable as of right now. I've kind of gone through like ups and downs where I'm like, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I all? Am I nothing? But I mean, at this point, I just like who I like, so I just use like the umbrella term as like bisexual. It was a little bit confusing at first because my mom is lesbian and she like came out after I went into middle school, and a lot of my family members were like, oh, you're just copying your mom. I'm like, I'm not copying my mom, I just like people. So like, I don't know, it was a little bit rough, but like my family's pretty understanding with it. I haven't like directly told them, but I'm sure they can just assume from what I have said.
I feel pretty content with my identity. I guess the processes that have gone along the way. I sort of like was thinking about my sexuality in like middle school and stuff like that. And I think in high school, like I made like queer friends in general. And just, I think like the internet sort of helped with me with like sort of coming to terms with my sexuality. So like right now I'm pretty content with just like identifying as gay. Yeah.
I feel really happy with my identity. It's been like a long road to get there, I think. I know like one thing that's helped for me is recently, I would like within the past few months, I was able to start like physically transitioning, which has just made me a lot more like comfortable to just be myself more like boldly in front of people.
Today, the more accepting world of fluidity both on the gender spectrum and sexuality spectrum would not be possible if it were not for the brave members of the queer community that came before all of us. Specifically, Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was not only a queer drag queen, but also an activist that took charge at Stonewall by fighting back. Her fight back ultimately sparked the confidence to fight for what is right in many queer folks at the time. The world of drag's influence is not limited to the queer community, as it has influenced much more than people have originally thought. Ballroom culture started in New York in the 1920s to shine light on many white drag queens at the time. Later in the 1960s, the queens of color decided to take charge and revamp so that those of color could be better represented. This ballroom scene is where drag originated. It was originally hidden in these underground clubs and areas that still exist today, as it is still a subculture. From the ballroom came gender expressions and acceptance, and it was quite literally at its finest. In addition to this sense of comfortability and acceptance, much of today's pop culture originated from the drag queens of the past and the present. From the ballroom came voguing, which later went on to be a huge craze thanks to Madonna's hit song, Vogue. Drag today is a beautiful culture that is constantly evolving and challenging many narratives of both gender and sexuality. Thanks to queen like RuPaul and Hot Chocolate, drag has made it into the mainstream media where it can be appreciated by all. However, not all media presentation of drag queens and other queer folk is portrayed in such a positive light.
And I sort of struggle from this like internalized transphobia sometimes where I feel like I'm being like predatory or something, because that's sort of this message that's been put out by a lot of people. So I definitely feel a little less like comfortable there because I'm still trying to figure out all that.
The bad portrayal of queer folk is not limited to the misconceptions of predatorial trans women. The way the media manipulated the HIV epidemic/AIDS pandemic and the way that Ronald Reagan went about discussing, or well, in his case, not discussing, the AIDS pandemic proved the lack of respect and acceptance of queer folk at the time. Millions lost their lives because the media and Ronald Reagan tricked people into thinking that it was a quote-unquote gay disease, or a quote-unquote gay plague. Meanwhile, thousands were dying because they could not get access to the care they needed, and the research to protect these people was not getting funded. Today, they are saying the newer usage of an mRNA vaccine as used in the COVID vaccines is showing promise of being helpful in developing a vaccine for those with AIDS. It only took a bunch of straight folk getting sick from COVID for the money and the research to magically appear. Today we run the risk of repeating similar events. In the AIDS pandemic, many lost their lives because people were not open to discussing solutions with others they deemed as unworthy of their time. Rather, they gatekept information about the truth of queer people at the time in the same way HB 616 will. The action of withholding information of queer history, as well as not introducing the concept of a systemic racism at such a formative age, will push back the agenda of progress by years. And we run the risk, again, of having our choice of withholding information negatively impact many around us, specifically those in marginalized communities that do not hold the power. That is why, to be a better community member or ally, you must vote no to HB 616. The power of queerness is fighting its way through mainstream media and making a name for itself, as well as the queer artists of said works. Shows like Pose on Netflix not only portray the unheard ballroom scene and show light of the hidden world, but they show queer identifying folk playing the queer actors. For example, Michaela J. Rodriguez is the star of the show and is not only playing a transgender woman, she is a transgender woman outside of the show. An example like this, where directors hire people who identify a specific way rather than hiring a straight person to play the role, move the world in a direction that is better accepting and has better representation. There's much more icons, too, that have influenced many queer-identifying teens, youth, and adults simply by expressing themselves publicly.
I mean, the first one that always comes to mind for me is Elliot Page. So I can never quite remember the timeline, but I'm pretty sure when he came out, it was like right after I realized I was trans, or at least pretty soon after. And it was... I think part of the reason it was so powerful to me was because you see a lot of like trans women, but trans men are a lot less common. And even though like I can't relate to being a trans man, it was just that feeling of like someone pushing these new boundaries of like what society sees. Because I think at the current point, I do think there's like a little bit more awareness that trans women exist rather than trans men. And then also, they use he, they pronouns, which I think is something a lot of people don't expect for a trans person. And since I use she, they pronouns, and then people are like, well, are you just like non-binary and like trans? It's like, I think Elliot was the first person who was such a public figure to be like, hey, I can be trans and non-binary. And that's just who I am, and I think that's caused people to start thinking about that more, and that was very helpful to me.
Like icons, when JoJo Siwa came out, I was like, oh, girl, thank you. It's kind of like a little opening.
That I've realized is there's a big difference between whether people are just okay with you talking about your identity, or if they actually want to hear you talk about it and understand you more as a person. Because, I mean, in elementary school, I would say they wanted to hear us talk about it.
Just wanted to add a quick little disclaimer at the end of this video, as there is so much queer culture and queer history that has been left out of the media for so long that there's not enough time to fit it into one little video. So I wanted to just encourage everyone in here, all of the allies who want to be better allies, to continue doing the research to better understand the community that they might not be a part of but could still be 100% connected to, and to all the members who maybe know a little bit, but doing more research can help you better understand yourself and those around you. But I also want you to remember that there is a lot of difference between learning the information from someone writing about it who hasn't experienced it firsthand. So just always keep that in mind at the back of your head, and just remember to live life like RuPaul. At the end of the day, if you can't love yourself, how can you love somebody else? So just keep walking forward with compassion, empathy, and an understanding and desire to want to connect with those around you. So, thank you.
Don't be homophobic. We'll have a problem. I'll find you.